and they're entitled to benefits. Well, the blood test for depleted uranium is $1,000 a test. We can't afford that in the United States, at least according to Dick Cheney, so that was cut out of the VA budget. And as for the rest of it, the Pentagon said, Doug, thank you very much, you're fired. So to this day now, it's estimated somewhere over 2,000 tons have been used in Iraq. But we used it first in 1991, the first Gulf War. Again, we provided it for the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. Again, Afghanistan through today, and then bombing Iraq from the Gulf War through the 90s and shock and awe through today. The tiny victims of Desert Storm, basically depleted uranium as a radioactive agent affects children most of all because they're growing, their cells are dividing, and if you introduce radiation into that, it screws it up. Now this is a Life Special Edition photo essay. I have a category on my website called Depleted Uranium, and this photo essay is linked to it. But this is what you'll find there. Basically, significant increase of congenital abnormalities in the children of veterans of Desert Storm, who had had normal children prior to their service. This little one born without arms and legs. This is the presentation as if the mother had taken thalidomide, which was an anti-nausea medication, but that's not, this mom hadn't taken it, and there was no history of this deformity in the family. This little one has spina bifida. That's failure of the spinal column, the neural tube, to close during development. She will never walk. And this little one has Goldenhar syndrome. Now this is a rare syndrome, and you can see some of the characteristics of it. You see his skull is misshapen because of that. Depending on how it's malformed, there's a loss of hearing or vision. Of course, you can't see that there's dextrocardia, which is the heart is on the wrong side. There are other musculoskeletal and neurological abnormalities. Now, what's important about Goldenhars is that this very rare syndrome, there's a cluster of cases among the children of Gulf War veterans. Now, they started to investigate it, but the money ran out. And in all the billions that have been appropriated for continuing the occupation, they've yet to further investigate this disease. Now, for Iraqis, you have an entire population, which was really, after the first Gulf War, was concentrated in southern Iraq, unfortunately Basra, where my family is. It's the most likely etiology of the 600% increase in Iraq's infant mortality rate after the first Gulf War, and 300% increase in the incidence of pediatric leukemias and lymphomas. The pediatricians were seeing, having new cancer diagnoses at a rate they had never seen before since the first Gulf War. And the congenital malformations became so common that mothers stopped asking when the child was born, is it a boy or a girl? They asked, is it normal? You see this little one, obviously has an IV in place and has the typical appearance of getting some chemotherapy. But what was happening in Iraq, thanks to economic sanctions, which blocked Iraq from selling oil, I'll come back to that, but also blocked the entry of really most products, including pharmaceuticals, was that because of the argument of dual use, that a chemotherapeutic agent used to treat a pediatric cancer might be used to manufacture chemical weapons, despite the fact that there was no evidence that that could be done. But pediatric leukemias and lymphomas have an excellent cure rate. There's a lot of money that goes into research for that. So they have a very high cure rate if you have availability of drugs. Now this child obviously is getting one round of drugs, but what would happen is you need multiple rounds of multiple drugs, and they would not have the other rounds to give. So the fatality rate on the pediatric ward in Basra Women and Children's Hospital during sanctions was 100%. Now, for you, uranium mining, getting the uranium to begin with, this is mostly, it happens from underground or open pit mines. And radioactive damage, it's already been found that that happens to the environment and public health in the area where these mines are. A lot of it comes from radioactive dust that comes from the mining area, as well as contaminated rainwater, which then if animals eat it, and if you're eating animals, and I do, then it goes to the food chain. More than 50% of the world's production of uranium is coming from Canada and Australia. Northern Saskatchewan is the world's largest most concentrated uranium reserves. And it's already been established that fisheries in the area have been poisoned, and it's threatened the indigenous communities. In the U.S. as well, we use the reservation areas where the Native Americans are living as a testing ground for uranium mining and uranium explosions. Uranium refining, that's another step in the process of getting uranium to the usable part for nuclear power. Port Hope, Ontario has the oldest uranium processing facility in the world. Now, back in the early 1940s, all the uranium that was processed in Port Hope was delivered to the United States for the Manhattan Project. I'm very sorry. I learned this when I was researching this, so I regret the complicity in the probably one of the greatest war crimes so far committed by the United States of America. And there's many to choose from. This is in Port Hope, and you see that, you know, this is the refinery, this is someone's house, here's a play set, here are the kids sitting over here, and this tarp over here is supposed to protect the dust from coming out. The Cameco Corporation. This was established several years ago through the privatization of Canada's uranium industry, combining with Eldorado Nuclear, and also merged Saskatchewan Mining Development Corporation. This is one of the 4 companies that provides uranium for the Western world, and you guys have the largest. Canada, it's Cameco. In the United States, it's Honeywell. In UK, it's British Nuclear Fuels Limited, and in France, it's Comerhex. Now, if you look at the company you're keeping, United States, Great Britain, and France, look, do you know what these colonial powers have done? You don't want to be associated with us, all right? Let me encourage you to separate. 85% of the uranium that's mined here in Canada gets exported. And it goes to the United States and France and Britain, where the enrichment plants are primarily military facilities. There's like a civilian, might be a civilian cover, but by and large, the money that keeps the ball rolling is military. Some of that, when it gets refined, it comes back to Canada, but the majority is converted to weapons-grade material. And again, because so little, as I mentioned, so little is usable for nuclear power, over 80% of what is exported becomes depleted uranium stores in the United States. So, unfortunately, you are helping to supply us with what we're using in Iraq and Afghanistan. These numbers are from the Canada Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility. Okay. Was Iraq a threat to us? No, Iraq was not a threat to us. And another major reason was that in the first Gulf War, the public health infrastructure was decimated. What happened was, well, I'll back up. Iraq's medical system was once known as the jewel of the Arab world. A first-class range of facilities, really a first-world system of medicine, so much so that Iraq had a whole tourist industry where people were coming to Iraq to have their healthcare needs met. And it was a socialist system, so it was paid for. But what happened was American planes and British planes targeted the infrastructure of Iraq, which is illegal. Because that's targeting the civilian population. That's a little something called the Geneva Conventions, which is optional where I come from, but just so I lay it out for you. And what happened was, with damage to the infrastructure, because we targeted water sewage treatment plants, there was massive disease outbreak. Primary health care and preventative services, basic general practitioner care, ceased to exist. And this is the report that documented it in 2003. In addition, we bombed the electrical grids. So if you imagine, you have very good medical care in Canada, and except for the fact that the moisture in the air would make my hair frizz too much, I want to move here. But you take out the electrical grids, what does that do to your healthcare system? You can't run ventilators. You cannot run surgical suites. You cannot run IV pumps. You cannot function as a first world medical system. It takes you out of commission. And that's what we did, we, United States and Great Britain, did to Iraq. A World Health Organization report that ironically came out on the day shock and awe started noted that the 3 major causes of morbidity and mortality for children under 5 in Iraq were easily treatable diseases. Acute lower respiratory infections, diarrheal disease, and then vaccine-preventable diseases like the measles. Respiratory infections and diarrhea were accounting for 70% of the deaths of children under 5. And Iraqis knew this, and they knew who was responsible. The increase in respiratory infections in the early 1990s was due to sanctions, food insecurity, inadequate feeding practices, malnutrition, lack of access to quality health services, combined with population displacement and overcrowding. And I want you to keep that in mind, because this has all escalated exponentially since the shock and awe invasion, because you have a refugee crisis of over 5 million. Diarrheal disease, cholera, became endemic in Iraq, and there happened to be outbreaks that coincide with American bombing campaigns. Dysentery was prevalent, again, due to destruction of the infrastructure. Was Iraq a threat to us? No, Iraq was not a threat to us, except that Saddam Hussein wanted to start using the euro, but that's another story. But another reason is because of economic sanctions, which I've already talked to you about. Imposed on Iraq on August 6, 1990, in a bitter irony on the anniversary of another targeting of a civilian population 45 years before the bombing of Hiroshima. What we did with sanctions, the most stringent sanctions ever, blocked the sale of oil by Iraq. This was punishment for moving troops into Kuwait. And this was 95% of their economy. Blocked the import of goods, as I already told you, and with the infrastructure destroyed, this inhibited reconstruction and inhibited health care and basic survival for the people. By 1995, 4 years of sanctions, UNICEF reported that it was yielding a minimum of political dividends against a high human price paid primarily by women and children. I mean, I ask my audiences, what would Americans do if another country's policies were targeting women and children? We would flip out, I guarantee you. The food rationing system, which had been, was begun when sanctions started by the regime, was providing less than 60% of the required daily caloric intake. That food rationing system continues to this day. It's what families are depending on. Many families are depending on for basic survival, and the new government in Iraq is eliminating it. Water and sanitation systems are in a state of collapse, and there's a critical shortage of life-saving drugs. So what happened when this report came out was this was the impetus for the Oil for Food program, which was supposed to begin in December 1996, and of course was rife with corruption, as many programs are. As I said, Saddam Hussein was getting fat off the oil he was selling on the black market. Who was he selling it to? Dick Cheney's Halliburton. 1997, another UNICEF study shows that nearly 1 million children in southern and central Iraq are chronically malnourished, an increase of 72% since 1991. So this is not just an accident. This is a policy affecting by far the majority of children. It is clear that children are bearing the brunt of the current economic hardship. And I'll show you through the medical system what was happening because we weren't allowing goods to come in. This little one has scoliosis. This brace doesn't really fit him, but this is the best they have to offer him. These images, by the way, are from Dar Jamil. And these little ones, obviously, you can see the malnutrition. You can see anywhere between 2 and 5 babies in one incubator. Why? Number one, they fit. Number two, if an incubator breaks down, you have to consolidate because there aren't the materials because of sanctions to repair or replace that incubator. Number three, when the rolling blackouts come and you're going to run a generator, it requires less fuel to run one incubator than 2. So this is the malnutrition that American foreign policy brought to Iraq. And unfortunately, this is where most of Iraq's children were ending up, with an estimated 5,000 deaths every month. Now, I just want to point out to you that this picture is from February 2003. Now, here we come to shock and awe. So shock and awe was not just a catchy phrase. It was actually a position paper written by Harlan Ullman and James Wade. Harlan Ullman is a professor at the National War College. I'm exceedingly embarrassed that we have a National War College in the United States. And Colin Powell was one of his students. But shock and awe, what basically achieving rapid dominance, this is a how-to for terrorism. Basically, how do you assault a population so that they will submit to your agenda? And in it, Ullman says, or Ullman describes, you have this simultaneous effect, rather like the nuclear weapons at Hiroshima, not taking days or weeks, but in minutes. Super tools and weapons, information age equivalents of the atomic bomb have to be invented. As the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki finally convinced the Japanese emperor and high command that even suicidal resistance was futile, these tools must be directed towards a similar outcome. This is who